Good evening, everyone. Greetings of peace. Welcome to celebration of Black History Month to 2022. Sorry, I'm excited. I'm sorry. So my name is Fatih Ferdi Atesh. I am with Pacifica Institute and Bay Area Cultural Connections. We are a nonprofit organization works around education, interfaith dialogue, and community building. As you may know, our works inspired by Hizmet and Service Movement and Turkish Islamic scholar Fethullah Gülen. Dear all, every February, the United States honors the contributions and the sacrifices of African Americans who have helped shape the nation. Black History Month celebrates the rich cultural heritage, accomplishments are an indelible part of our country's history. As an American Muslim, I am highly interested and curious about African American history because first Muslims in this land were people of color Muslims. So Muslim American history is Black history. With that being said, I am excited and honored to have dear sister and a colleague, Michelle Miles Chambers, Faith's Senior Program Officer at wonderful organization San Francisco Foundation. She will be offering the opening reflections. Welcome, and floor is yours, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Fatih. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to start our day off with the way that we started in our Black. And if you know it, sing it.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky.
Let it
resound.
Let it resound.
As the rolling sea.
I like this part right here. Come on.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on.
Let us march on.
Till victory is won.
Now we add a little something to it. Just to encourage you. We're gonna take it to church later. Let's go.
We'll keep marching right until the victory is won.
To all my brothers out there.
Hold your head up, brother, till the victory is won.
To all my sisters in the struggle.
Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won.
Till that day.
Till that day comes.
Hey.
Let us march on.
To victory.
Till victory is won. Is won.
So this is how we start our Black History celebration. And I'm so honored, first of all, to be here today with you all and lift every voice and sing. This was initially a poem by James Weldon Johnson, and then his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson put music to it. This poem came to him in the early 19th century. So this song has been around a long time. And then the NAACP picked it up, and it was just the children were going around from school to school singing it, and it became our Black national anthem. But what I want to say about it is the words are my ancestors, our ancestors. They had to feel these words in order to be able to move through so many different circumstances and situations. And I'm talking about as we came over here as slaves, that our faith, now my spiritual pathway is Christianity. So our faith had to move us through this. We had to be really content in the Lord to be able to know that we were going to be marching on until victory was won. We were creating a blueprint for me. They was creating a blueprint for me, for my grandchildren, for my great grandchildren. No matter how it looked, they had faith. And then they had to discover true happiness. And so for me, Black History Month is, number one, you have to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. I sung it every day because I went to a school in my community where it was a predominantly Black school. And so Black culture and Black history was part of our everyday routine. It just wasn't a chapter in the book. And so what I want to say is, because of the spirituality that I have and the remnants that my ancestors provided for me, and the blueprint and this song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, it really gives me the victory to know that I have to be true to God, no matter what happens, that I have to stand, because Black history is American history. And as the end of the song says, we have to be true to our native land. And America is our native land. And we're so honored that to be here sharing this with you. And I just want to, at this point, introduce my dear beloved brother, Cedric Brown. This is a dynamite brother, you guys. We are so blessed to have him here. Let me tell you, he has so many talents. Now, he is a good cook. Now, he's actually a great singer as well. He's a great poet. He has integrity, tenacity. He likes to have fun. He circles himself around really great people. He is an innovative thinker. He can think outside of the box to help our Black community and all communities of color. I am so proud to call him part of my family. Brother Cedric Brown.
Michelle, thank you. This warm and beautiful reflection and wonderful song. Thank you very much, dearest Michelle, our dear sister and colleague. So it is my honor and privilege to introduce and welcome to our keynote speaker tonight. I want to call him my brother and my colleague. So I'm so honored to have him. I'm so excited to have him. So I think that Michelle is already introduced Cedric, but I want to say something about him as well. The Cedric Brown is an award-winning social impact leader with 20 plus years of deep and varied experience in the philanthropy and NGO sectors. He has built a significant track record of working to ensure pathways to opportunities for people of color in the United States through tech startup entrepreneurship, tech inclusion and equity, and college readiness and the completion, arts and cultural representation, and voter education and the civic engagement. His notable leadership roles and collaborations include those with the Caper Center and the Foundation. It's another beautiful organization. Cedric and I are honored to work together there at the Caper, and the San Francisco Foundation, Google, Color of Change, the Congregational Black Caucus, Oakland Museum of California, and Blavity Afrotech. Cedric is a published author, largely interested in the African diaspora and Black LGBTQ themes. Cedric is currently exploring transnational leadership development and initiatives in social impact and cultural spaces. He works as Executive Director of Global Leadership Programs at the Obama Foundation, guiding initiatives in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Europe. So he's busy, honestly, but thank you for making time and coming tonight and being with us, Cedric. So after Cedric's speech, we will have time for Q&A and the audience reflections, brothers and sisters. So welcome, dearest Cedric, floor is yours.
Well, wow, I'm full already. So first, let me start by thanking the universe and all of its abundant blessings provided day in and day out. And I also want to thank my good brother, Fatih Atesh, a man who embodies goodwill and good faith across borders and belief systems. So Chok Teshekuler and Jazakallah Ukai. Secondly, thanks to the Pacifica Institute and this beautiful community of people gathered here. I'm looking at names in the chat and see friends and faces from over the years, and I'm just so happy and honored to be here, with a special shout out to my former colleague and longtime sister friend, Michelle Miles Chambers. Y'all know how sometimes you know people for so long that they just become family. Well, that's us. So I'm going to talk with you for about 20 minutes and then hope we can get into a little bit of dialogue and exchange. And we may even have a little call and response kind of mixed in here, since Michelle has started taking us to church a little bit already. So let's go. Y'all ready? All right. I am Ailey and Ali, Alvin and Muhammad. I am Arthur and Audra, Ash and Lord. I am Bayard Rustin and County Cullen. I am Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou. Black history is me. Black history is part of me. Well, good people, I'm actually Cedric Brown, as you heard from the introductions. One of the many labels that I claim and answer to is Senior Atlantic Fellow for Racial Equity, striving for the self-actualization of Black people and all people has been part of my personal and professional path for the past 30 years. But that doesn't mean I'm an expert on diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging. Quite the contrary, I remain a student, an observer, and sometimes a social critic. So I hope no one came for strategies or consultation, but instead you're here for some hope and inspiration. And that I hope to achieve this evening. So I bring you greetings from my hometown of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I was born into a formerly segregated all-Black hospital during the summer of love in the middle of a thunderstorm, as my mother likes to tell me. Branches of my family tree here in North Carolina go back 6 generations, as far as we can count, before the wall of slavery leads us to question marks on our family tree, and a path further into the past made much more difficult to trod. I was in the first wave of students sent to integrated schools, where every 2 years, we were bused to the other side of town, Blacks to white neighborhoods, whites to Black neighborhoods, for 7th and 8th, 9th and 10th, 11th and 12th grades, until housing patterns here were mixed enough so that 4-year high schools became the norm again. And then eventually the schools resegregated, but we'll talk about that later. In this regard, I not only bear witness to history, but I've participated in it. And we all have, but more on that later. We are here this evening to celebrate Black History Month. Black History Month, I love saying it so much, it has many names. Black History Month, Black Futures Month, Black Love Month, Black Heritage Month, and they all taste sweet and savory in my mouth when I say them. This is a particular time to lift up Blackness, to recognize and value the achievements of Black people, which are too often overshadowed or undervalued. This is a time to purposely remember the past in the present while meditating on the implications for the future. I'll be talking tonight about the US context, but as Fatih mentioned earlier, Black History Month is celebrated in February here in the US. Also, it's celebrated by our diasporic cousins in Canada, and in October by our good peeps in the UK. And I love them all. But to be clear, as I speak with you, esteemed audience and community, Black History Month isn't just a celebration and learning opportunity of, by, and for Black people. Too often, I have encountered folks who think that Black-focused things aren't theirs to experience or learn from, that there's no universality in Blackness. These are the same folks who slide on through Martin Luther King weekend and Black History Month and Juneteenth because the celebration isn't about them. These are the folks who might even generate the nerve to ask, why do they get a day, month, holiday anyway? Yes, I have been asked that directly. For these reasons and more, Black History Month in all of its incarnations is for all of us. Black history is part of me. Black history is part of thee. I am Shirley Chisholm and Zora Neale Hurston, Romare Bearden and Tom Bradley, Marlon Riggs and Wilma Rudolph and Esther Roll. Black history is part of me. So let's consider Blackness for a moment. We Black people have been called many names, everything and including a child of God. Some names chosen and some names forcibly bestowed. Some elegant and ancestral, some powerful and conjured. We've been called Negro, colored, Afro-American, African-American, hyphenated and not, African in America, from high yellow to highly melanated, all Black. But our names and the implication of that identity is seemingly always contested, seemingly always under scrutiny. Are all people of mostly African blood considered Black? Are Africans Black? Are Caribbean peoples Black? Why do some people claim African but not Black? Why do some people claim nationality but not a broader diasporic Blackness? Why do some people run from Blackness? I once wrote a story about an experience that I had in Brazil with a friend, my friend Asha. That's not her real name, but I'm gonna protect the innocent. Asha was ready to go off on this girl if she asked the sandpaper-skinned, blonde, dreadlocked Asha one more time why she considered herself to be Black. Here in Brazil, you could be white, Mariana reasoned. Look at your eyes and your skin. You could be white. I can call myself mixed, mulata, pardo, morena, but never Black. Never Black. Such a shame to our American eyes and ears, such a shame, never Black. In a US context, someone would surely ask Mariana as she walked slowly down a southern street in her cutoff jeans, hey, Redbone, want some company? Instead, here in her native land of Brazil, Mariana was being confronted because we outsiders were offended by her negative notions of Blackness. Fortunately, Mariana escaped with minor lacerations to her pride after Asha's left hook eye roll and hasty departure from the scene. After the tension on the beach that day, we sought out more answers from people who did call themselves Black. Moises and Vilma and Nilsechi and João. Eventually, we understood that because we weren't in Kansas no more, that our one drop rule around Blackness no longer applied. Eventually, we understood that Mariana's references to Blackness were strongly tied to class and that the stereotypical face of Brazilian poverty is Black. Eventually, we understood that in a realm where multiple complexions are recognized and named in Brazil, Blackness also describes a feeling, an orientation, and a value system. In a strange way, maybe Mariana was right. We are Black because we choose to be. How ironic that our wake-up call around Blackness was due in part to a woman who never described herself as Black, even when given many reasons to do so in that sunny, soulful slice of the world. So Black identity is, again, an expression of pride. It's a feeling, an orientation, a value system. It's part of a greater rejection of the negativity that Blackness was originally constructed to represent, especially when juxtaposed with whiteness. So those of us who are descendants of enslaved Africans here in North America don't claim Blackness as a generalized escape from a more specific ethnic identity. We claim it because we are a melange of multiple heritages, mostly African, and we get to take all of that genetic and cultural inheritance. Blackness is an expression of an enormous cultural energy and creative power and deeper love and capacity for resilience. So let's now consider history. You've probably heard the often quoted proverb of the Ewe Mina people of Benin, Ghana, and Togo, which is very appropriate when considering Black History Month. Now, I don't speak Ewe, so the English is, until the lion has its own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. Until the lion has its own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. History gets a bad rap, as it should in certain ways, because for so long, the drab and dry stories told from one viewpoint in US history did not bring alive and into account the perspectives of others who were there bearing witness and participating or prevented from participating in making what has now become historical fact. Remember when I said that history is personal? Well, Frederick Douglass, the brilliant statesman and abolitionist, offers what I think of as the definitive answer of a historical counterpoint in his famed "What to a Slave is the 4th of July" speech, a searing and severe takedown of 19th century American hypocrisy around that celebration of freedom. He says, "The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters, shackles, into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony." He really goes in on the speech. But here, Frederick Douglass is acting as the lion. Now, what do these celebrations of freedom and liberty mean if I'm wearing these shackles? And what other moments can we think of right now where the challenging of history and retelling of the story has come into question by the hunter? As my wise younger sister told me just this morning, in light of this anti-CRT legislation and bomb threats at HBCUs, it becomes more important that we teach our children true and accurate American history with the purpose of not going back, like how enslaved people's free labor and intellectual property enriched the US for years, like how prominent Black communities were destroyed without compensation, like in Wilmington, Durham, Red Summer, Tulsa, etc. And might I add, the countless stories of people who made a way out of no way, as the church folks say. Black history is rich. It's validating, it's astonishing, it's infuriating. It's about people who were forced to make a complete adjustment and assimilation to new weather, new terrain, new food, new customs, new clothing, new language, new worship systems, etc. Often, pretty much all the time, under brutal and dehumanizing conditions. Black history is our opportunity to discover and remember, to call out those names and consider the impacts on our individual and collective selves, to discover and remember the who's who of achievers and believers, strivers and drivers, all of them necessary to construct and reconstruct our story of ourselves in a once strange land that we've now made home, becoming the lion of that proverb. Black history is also a collective recollection of ordinary people doing what turns out to be extraordinary things. Now, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the nation's oldest continuous Greek letter organization serving collegiate Black men. When I consider the circumstances under which our 7 founders, we call them our 7 jewels, transformed their literary society into a fraternal organization in 1906 in upstate New York, at a time when 89% of Black Americans lived in the South and fewer than 100 Blacks across the nation graduated from college in a given year. Now, those men were already exceptional because they were on that campus. But I wonder if they could have envisioned an organization nearly 300,000 men strong 116 years later. That is ordinary people doing what turns out to be extraordinary things. Black history in the making. Now let's consider Black History Month. I am the Kings, Dr. Martin Luther King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and the Queens, Toni Morrison and Aretha Franklin. I am a grower, George Washington Carver, and a knower, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois. And we call their names now part of history, our Black history, our American history, our human history, because of the ways that these folks have pushed us as a nation to consider our better and our best selves, and provided examples to the world of the energy and ingenuity, which, in spite of being born under duress, would stretch and blossom in spite of these conditions. For folks who complain about Black History Month taking place in February, the shortest month of the year, let's always have them remember its origins. Black History Month started as Negro History Week, established by Mr. Carter G. Woodson, himself a scholar and historian, who chose February as the birth month of Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and the aforementioned champion, Frederick Douglass. So maybe Mr. Woodson was motivated in this effort to recognize our roots here in the United States, to explicitly intertwine Blackness with Americanness, because, without Blackness, ain't no real Americanness, and to make Black history a serious discipline within the broader canon of historical studies. Mr. Woodson's intention was never to limit the celebration of Blackness to a discrete 28-day, sometimes 29-day time frame. To believe that was the case is ironically ahistorical, and we need to always challenge people around that. So in closing, and in celebration of Black History Month for everyone, I ask you, dear audience, what Black Americans have had an impact on your own life, inspiring you to do better, to try again, to test yourself, to give thanks, to seek and see a new perspective? Whose names do you carry with you in the folds of your brains or the fibers of your heart? Whose names do you want to call, to lift up, to remember? Because Black History Month isn't just a recognition of the past, it's a validation of how those legacies live on in all of us. We're all an amalgamation of Black history as part of our overall makeup and influences. So if you can think of someone who has inspired you, put their name in the chat box. I want to see the names as they come in. Put their names in the chat box, let the names come. This is like a roll call, proof that history makers are ever present with us. So let the names come. Let me see. We see Harriet Tubman here. We see Will and Carrie Smith here. We see Faye Patterson here. Come on, names. Carolyn Archie, Cedric Bounds, James Baldwin here. Thank you. We see Malik Al-Shabazz here. We see Michelle and Ken Chambers here. We see Louis Gregory Abahai here. We see Bernard and Dolania Collins here. We see George Floyd here. We see Fannie Lou Hamer here. We see Muhammad Ali here. Yes, indeed. And with all of these names, I'm going to invoke our call and response tradition now. So say it where you are, that Black history is part of me. Say it where you are. Black history is part of me. So if you tonight, tomorrow, or the next night, or next week or month, reflect on this exercise and how someone Black has propelled you toward your more curious self, your more strong self, your more inspired self, more actualized self, remember our incantation this evening that Black history is part of me. And in these times, as loving people that we are, this is going to require us to celebrate and defend Blackness from the all too present scourge of anti-Blackness, to stand up for justice when possible, to speak out for justice where possible, and to live justly by all means possible. This also means not declaring yourself to be colorblind, which strips people of their culture, their flavor, their experiences, but instead recognize others for their full humanness and human fullness. Black History Month is our annual touchstone, a time to get regrounded in the love of ourselves and the love of others, and to open ourselves to the bounty of human brilliance born in this case from Black people. Black history is indeed part of you. How will you celebrate Blackness this month and every month? Thank you for this opportunity to share and celebrate.
Black history is part of me. Thank you very much, dear Cedric. This wonderful speech. I would like to invite my dear sister Michelle again and to ask her his response.
Oh, can I just say, wow, Cedric, like, I knew you was out of sight, brother, but you was dynamite and out of sight, as they say on Good Times. You was painting that canvas, brother. You was painting it. Thank you. Thank you. So my question is, Black history is me. You said Black history is rich. It's astonishing. How can we involve ourselves in our daily lives to share more about our culture and our heritage, especially now when it seems like we are moving into an era where we're almost back to the 19th century, although we've come so far? How can we do that and incorporate our youth and our young people? So many of them, when I talk about Black History Month, they're not interested.
This is in part why I spoke to history getting a bad rap and history seeming like it's something that isn't applicable to young people, to teenagers and folks who haven't fully come into their own kind of intellectual maturity yet and haven't fully formed who they are going to be as they move through the world. I think that people end up embracing these figures and this knowledge when they can build enough kind of self of pride in order to understand what this history means for them and how it has actually positioned them to be. One video that I saw years ago, Marlon Riggs, who's one of my heroes, a fantastic Emmy-winning videographer, did a piece called Black is, Black ain't, just before he passed away in the early 90s. And he showed a conversation that he was having with several young people. And one of the young men devastatingly asked, well, what did Martin Luther King do for me? And the fact that we need to answer that question, be ready to answer that question and place it in a contemporary context means all of us need to do our homework and be ready to answer those kinds of questions when our young folk ask. But Michelle, I think it's a mixture of putting information in front of them, celebrating Blackness and Black history, and encouraging people to mature around their own learning. And they'll get it. Because, you know, we think about how we got it. So I think we just steadily have to encourage and learn and celebrate.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Cedric. I think there's one reflection and the question also, Cedric. It reads, racism is often interpreted as one individual acting with prejudice towards another individual on the basis of race. But history teaches us that racism is not only individual, but also institutional. Racism is built into the foundation of the United States from the early days of colonization and the slavery. Today, it operates in education, policing, healthcare, housing, and even food policy. When defining racism, why do many people ignore institutional racism? And it asks, how can you challenge institutional racism today?
So I think that this is a great question, and actually the context setting that it did before leading up to the question itself is powerful information unto itself. I think that in order to have folks really understand what institutional racism is or systemic racism is, we have to consider that this country was founded based on slave labor, and with part of the economy based on slave labor. And in order to justify the kind of transatlantic enslavement of Africans that the founding fathers had to justify and codify in the Constitution, they had to declare us 3/5 of human beings, and they had to set up a system of thinking around Africanness and Blackness that positioned us as inferior beings, so that they could justify the enslavement and oppression of these inferior beings. That also meant that since day one here in the United States, there are other systems that lifted up certain kinds of folks and pushed down certain kinds of folks. And many of those systems are still in play through the ways that we believe in innate human value. I will go out on a limb and say, too many people believe that if you're poor, it's your fault and you're lesser than. Too many people believe that if you're a person of color, you're lesser than. You have fewer capabilities, you're lesser than. And most of this stems from the early, I'm not going to say necessary, but the early attempts to justify the slave trade and what folks had to do, the kind of mindset they had to establish in order to say, oh, we have to enslave them in order to take care of these childlike beings who work for us. And that has repercussions until today. One thing that I hear people, one kind of retort that I hear folks some conservative folks coming back with is, well, you know, I didn't own any slaves. You may not have owned any slaves. Your ancestors may not have owned any slaves, but you benefit from that system of thinking about the supposed inferiority of Africans benefits you today because it has had lingering effects over the past 250 to 300 years that we've been here in these United States. There was another part of that question, but I forgot what it is. What was the second part?
Yes, thank you. It's for people who is in our call in the Zoom, and also is almost 25 people is watching us through our YouTube live stream. Let us know your questions and comments and your reflection. And also I see diverse faith leaders, interfaith leaders, and community leaders, and people around the Bay Area. I know many of them here. Susan Strauss, Linda Crawford, I would like to mention that, and Rita Robinson from the San Francisco Foundation also. If any of you would like to ask a question to Cedric or give you reflection, please just let me know, and you can ask or you can give your reflection if you like. Okay, and we have another question. Rita Robinson.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a reflection, because anytime Cedric speaks, I always listen and admire and always impressed with whatever he says. I love your knowledge of our history. It's just like a master class being here with you tonight. And so I really appreciate that. And I appreciate our friendship, and I love my love for you. And I just think this is a great forum to, just to share about our history, because you don't have many opportunities to share with folks other than those who look like us. So I applaud all of you who are here to hear this, because it's just beautiful, to hear, because all we hear about, is came here as slaves and, all that stuff, but it's such a rich history of our people and of this land. And so I appreciate you, Cedric. It's so good to see you, and thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Such big love for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Thank you. I appreciate it. And also, I think we have one more question, Cedric, for you, and asking, what would a world look like without racism or prejudice? White people need to talk to other white people about eliminating prejudice. What would you say that, Cedric?
What would the world look like without racism or prejudice? If we can get rid of all the isms, what would that world look like? It would look like people being able to move toward being self-actualized, being who the Creator made them to be, and would enable them to express their fullest selves while here on Earth. So I think we would have these really vibrant communities across the world of people who could appreciate each other, who could learn from each other, who may do things in different ways, but wouldn't be threatened by someone who prayed differently or loved differently or ate differently or dressed differently or was in a different place. We wouldn't have this kind of fear and negativity around difference if we could eliminate all of the isms. I think we would probably still be human. We would probably still fuss and fight and cry over some issues, but I love to think about the possibility of the world being an even more vibrant place. But you know what? On a note of hope, I want to lift up in these what can be dark and depressing times. I really want to lift up all of the voices across the nation and world of people who see each other, who value each other, who are willing to give each other a chance, even if it's not super deep, even if they're wanting to be civil to one another and recognize each other's humanness in passing. That's a starting place. So we have that to hold on to and to continue to build.
I got very good feedback, Cedric, and people just thanking this wonderful and insightful speech. And one friend says, "Greetings from Kansas City," believe it. And so and one say, "Thank you very much for very nice and meaningful program." So another question here is, and one says, "The wonderful exhibit at the Oakland Museum, Afrofuturism," and I would like to read it. And also, can you speak to the issue of reparations and how that could be achieved? Is that Catherine Houston?
You know, what do I want to say about reparations? I think that without a kind of truth and reconciliation like process that South Africans had when they came out of the apartheid years, without something like that where we are building empathy, building civility and connections, and building the emotional context for then reparations to happen, I'm afraid that reparations, however justified they are, I'm afraid reparations would land in a wrong place and would continue to foment a lot of this divisiveness that we have. I am for the exploration of reparations in this nation, but it has to be accompanied by a lot of other work in our communities to get people ready, to make sure people understand what this is really about. Otherwise, it could just be a mess. And not to say that the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa was perfect, because it wasn't, and it certainly has its critics. But we need some moment of national healing that is based on empathy and not on a payout, because that can invoke more skepticism.
And I think there is another question from Ellen Stromberg. Is she asking maybe follow-up question, or the similar question is actually, in what way and how could reparations to the descendants of the enslaved be part of our healing and the growing?
So that was the one that I was actually answering, that without an accompanying process, that I think we wouldn't be able to pull it off as a nation, particularly in these moments of vitriol and rising sense of nationalism. Without the community building, without people of faiths coming together, without folks being able to establish more empathy and connectedness across different demographic lines, again, I think we wouldn't be able to pull it off.
Thank you, Cedric. Another question from Interfaith Council of Sacramento, Serena Erby. And the question is, how does racism hurt everyone, whites, blacks, etc.?
It's interesting to me that the shackle is such a potent symbol of slavery and bondage. And racism is a shackle because it prevents people from being able to move freely. It prevents the folks who are discriminated against and oppressed from being able to move freely. And it prevents the people who are putting on the shackles by engaging in racist, sexist, anti-gay, et cetera, behavior. They're in shackles too, because they're locked into a certain kind of thinking that is based on fear, and devaluing other people. So I think that it hurts everyone. I mean, the short answer is, I think that it hurts everyone because it, again, keeps us from fulfilling our greatest potential because we're afraid. And when we're afraid, we don't do our best work. When we're afraid, we don't love. When we're afraid, we stay tight. So it locks everyone into a vicious cycle of not being able to be free.
I think it was, I want to add this, Cedric, with your permission. So when I come to this country almost 20 years ago, I was thinking that people has stereotypes and prejudice toward the Muslims and Islam. Maybe it is true. It is true. But at the same time, when I meet with beautiful people like you guys, and I started and I realized that I have many prejudices and stereotypes as well. So I highly encourage to every folks and the friends here, brothers and sisters, to be in dialogue with someone out of your box, out of your church, out of your mosque or synagogue, and know people, get to know people. And then it really realized that, or at least it helped me to target to become a better person, to become the faithful person to God. So I think the dialogue, especially in the conversation and actively listening, I think and building bridges from heart to heart is really help to heal and overcome the prejudices, I think.
So well said. So well said. And if I may suggest, Fati, that I think there is an openness that folks can have. One of the reasons why I wanted us to do this little exercise of trying to think about someone, a Black American, who has had an impact on your own life, is that exercise can actually be used in many different ways. So next month, when we go into Women's History Month, who are the women who have had this positive influence on us? And how does that then cause us to start thinking about and looking at and embracing kind of women as powerful forces differently? I also want to offer that if folks are introverted and folks don't know how to start up a conversation, or a little leery of kind of the approach, or don't know where to find people, there is a library in every community. There is a bookstore in every community. There are resources and reading lists online for every community. So I think reading can be such a wonderful starting place to try to learn something about people who are different from ourselves. So I'm kind of using this Black History Month platform, our celebration of Black History Month, as much as I love saying it, Black History Month, Black History Month, to also advocate for us just being able to learn about everybody and to recognize the beauty in the heritages that so many people possess. And we can do it.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that you already responded that, but the one question was saying that the immigrants come here ignorant of racism. How can they be educated in it? I think you already responded this question. I also offer to people, please join some interfaith dialogue circles, some book discussions, or I don't know, some settings with intercultural settings. And so I think that would be really educational for all of us, I believe. And
if I may, excuse me, right quick, at yes. One point, to address the question about immigrants, at one point there was an effort to include, as part of kind of an acculturation and resettlement processes for folks who come to the US, to include broader histories with the opportunities to learn more about the populations of people who are here in the United States from the perspective of those populations of folks, in order to start countering some of the stereotypes that folks who come to the US not kind of aware of the history and the dynamics here. I don't know what happened with that effort, but I thought that it was such a brilliant idea to be able to kind of give people information to say, this is what you're coming into, and these are all of the folks you're going to see. Because think about it, there really aren't that many nations that have this kind of mixture demographically of folks within their national boundaries. Ethnic groups, perhaps, different religious groups, perhaps, but the big mix that we have here is a rarer thing than we might think.
Thank you, Cedric. So let's get the couple more questions and the comments. So another question is, perhaps programs for all in education, health, and opportunities would serve the same end results as reparations.
Perhaps.
Would you like to say something? Okay.
Perhaps. I feel like, and I may be going out on a limb here, and I have to be careful what I say on, I have to be careful what I say when it's recorded. I think if we had well-financed social systems that were really able to take care of folks' basic needs, and to educate our folks and to not create hardship after hardship. If you want to go to college, you have to get the money for it. If you get the money for it, you end up with all this debt. You can't take certain jobs because you're trying to pay your debt down, blah, blah, blah. If we really thought about our investment in people here in the United States, perhaps in a different way, and we're willing to invest at the front end and throughout in a different way, and not leave people to their own devices so much, I think we would have better outcomes. I don't think it would get rid of racism unto itself, and I don't think that it would make up all of the lost ground because of what systemic racism has done, particularly around, someone asked a question about wealth building and home ownership. That's a huge gap here, and that has to be made up perhaps in some other kind of way. So That's what I'll say about that.
Thank you, Cedric. One more question from our beloved friend, Kenneth Chambers. How does racism and prejudice affect Black love, and what solutions would you give Black youth on how to learn to love themselves and someone else healthily?
So thank you, Reverend Chambers. I'm gonna take the first part first about racism and prejudice affecting Black love. We, as many Black folk on the call know, we have absorbed some of the lessons of anti-Blackness, some of the tenets of anti-Blackness, and they come out in the ways that Black folk can devalue ourselves and other Black folk. So we have to get out of those ways of thinking and be able to recognize the innate value of all Black folk and be able to not lump all of us together. One of the things that I started saying was that I wasn't going to publicly, ever again, publicly denounce Black folk. Oh, Black people this, or Black people don't know how to. And we hear a lot of that in our communities. It's kind of scrutiny of the lump sum of Black folk. And I said I was never, ever going to do that. I didn't really do it before, but I wanted to make a concerted effort to not do it now, because we need to be looking at our power. We need to recognize the ways that we can value each other. That's, I think, where a certain kind of Black love starts and gets expressed. And then to the question about youth, again, this came up a little bit earlier, to just continually feed our young people culture, about our history, about our worth and value. And if the food is in front of them, they might partake of little pieces of it, but I don't think that you can go through a rich education around Blackness, Black history, Black culture, et cetera, and not take something away from it as you become your mature self. So I think we just have to continue to provide it, because they're not going to go through it with deaf ears.
Thank you, Cedric. And I think there was one more contribution I would like to read. The churches are presently engaging people in dialogue, as I know the many temples, synagogues, and the mosques and the Islamic centers do as well. Encourage people to engage in intercultural and interfaith dialogue, which is I am proud of the part of it. Just Faith has a faith and racial healing program. The Episcopal Church engages parishes in sacred ground, and the Baha'i Church in our area started an interfaith book group, which was well received. And thank you for all efforts to building bridges, not walls. We have enough walls. I think we need to build more bridges among communities and the groups and the communities as well. So, well, being said, this is a beautiful celebration, I believe. This is a beautiful community. We are here at the Zoom or our YouTube live stream. So Cedric, thank you very much for this enlightening speech. Dearest Sister Michelle, thank you for supporting us for this event and also always being a good friend and a colleague. And dear friends, I would like to thank every one of you attending Celebration Black History Month event tonight. You can always access to recordings of this lecture and the previous events in Pacifica Institute's YouTube channel. So my last message at closing is, as we approach to Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which signifies starting the divine revelation to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we will have finally in-person Ramadan interfaith events in April throughout the Bay Area locations. So please check the details for upcoming events in Pacifica Institute website and other interfaith and intercultural and social and community building opportunities. And thank you. Hope to see you all again